We all watched Sex and the City and thought we were witnessing the greatest love story of our generation. But what if I told you that what millions of viewers romanticized was actually a textbook case of psychological trauma bonding? What if Carrie's decades-long obsession with Mr. Big wasn't love at all, but something far darker and more disturbing? The uncomfortable truth is that Carrie Bradshaw never loved Big. She was addicted to him. And once you see the signs, you can never unsee them. Every romantic gesture, every tearful reunion, every passionate declaration was actually feeding a cycle of psychological abuse that would make a therapist's head spin. Think about it. How many healthy relationships require a woman to spend 6 seasons and 2 movies desperately trying to figure out where she stands with her partner? How many functional love stories involve one person consistently choosing uncertainty over stability, chaos over peace, emotional starvation over genuine connection? Big was emotionally unavailable from day one, and that wasn't a bug in their relationship, it was the entire feature. See, Carrie had classic abandonment issues, and Big's hot and cold behavior triggered something deep within her psyche. Every time he pulled away, every time he refused to commit, every time he left her hanging, it activated her desperate need to prove she was worthy of love. But here's where it gets really dark. Recent psychological analysis reveals something chilling about Carrie's pattern. She was unconsciously trying to fulfill an expectation of being chosen and valued, possibly by a father figure who was notably absent from her entire storyline. We never meet Carrie's father, never hear about him, never see any indication of a healthy male relationship in her childhood. Big became the ultimate unavailable father substitute, and Carrie spent 6 seasons trying to earn his approval like a child desperately seeking validation from someone who would never give it. The psychology behind this is brutal. When children experience abandonment or emotional neglect from parental figures, they often spend their adult lives unconsciously recreating those same dynamics, hoping this time they'll get it right. This time they'll be worthy enough. This time they'll finally be chosen. This wasn't love, this was compulsion, this was trauma response. This was a woman so damaged by early abandonment that she mistook emotional starvation for passion, confusion for chemistry, and psychological wounds for romantic destiny. But Big wasn't just emotionally unavailable, he was a master manipulator who seemed to understand exactly which buttons to push. Experts now recognize his behavior as classic narcissistic abuse tactics that follow a predictable pattern. He love-bombed Carrie in the beginning, showering her with attention, expensive gestures, and just enough intimacy to get her hooked. Those early episodes show him pulling out all the stops, the fancy restaurants, the thoughtful gifts, the intense conversations that made Carrie feel like she was the most fascinating woman in New York. Then came the devaluation phase, where he'd become distant, critical, and emotionally withholding. Suddenly, Carrie wasn't interesting enough, sophisticated enough, or worthy enough of his full attention. He'd make plans and cancel them, introduce her as his friend instead of his girlfriend, and consistently make her feel like she was asking for too much by wanting basic relationship clarity. The most insidious part, the hoovering. Every single time Carrie tried to move on, every time she found happiness with someone else, every time she started healing from his rejection, Big would mysteriously reappear with just enough attention to pull her back into his orbit. Remember when she was happy with Aiden, building a real life with someone who actually wanted to be with her, and suddenly Big needed her help with furniture shopping? The timing wasn't coincidental, it was calculated. Or when she was finally building an independent life in Paris with Petrovsky and Big showed up with grand romantic gestures right when she was starting to question her relationship choices? These weren't romantic coincidences, these were strategic interruptions designed to keep Carrie from ever fully moving on. And let's talk about his pattern of hiding major life decisions from her. The Paris job offer that would take him away for months, his previous marriages that he barely mentioned, his real name that he kept secret, his family background that remained mysterious. Big consistently excluded Carrie from the most important aspects of his life, while expecting her complete emotional availability. He wanted all the benefits of her love and devotion without any of the vulnerability or commitment that real relationships require. That's not love, that's control. That's not romance, that's manipulation. That's not partnership, that's exploitation of someone's psychological wounds for personal gain. The most damning evidence that Carrie's feelings weren't real love came during her relationship with Aiden. Here was a man who offered her everything Big wouldn't: commitment, honesty, emotional availability, genuine partnership, consistent affection, and the kind of stability most people dream of. Aiden was building them a life together, renovating her apartment, talking about marriage and children, showing up every single day with love and dedication. And what did she do? She cheated on him with Big. Big, not just once in a moment of weakness, but repeatedly, systematically, and with full awareness of what she was destroying. Think about that for a second. Carrie had everything she claimed to want with Aiden, a man who loved her unconditionally, who wanted to build a future with her, who never made her question his feelings or intentions, but she threw it away to have an affair with the man who'd been jerking her around for years, who had already proven he couldn't give her what she needed, who represented everything toxic and unstable in her romantic life. She didn't choose Big because she loved him more, she chose him because he was unavailable. She chose chaos over peace, uncertainty over security, trauma bonding over genuine connection. She chose the familiar pain of loving someone who couldn't love her back over the unfamiliar territory of being genuinely loved and valued. Her confession to her friends afterward was incredibly telling. She wasn't devastated about hurting Aiden, wasn't consumed with guilt about betraying someone who trusted her completely. Instead, she was excited and energized about being wanted by Big again. She was high on the temporary validation of being chosen by someone who usually rejected her. That's not the behavior of someone in love, that's the behavior of someone feeding an addiction. That's someone getting their next hit of the drug that's been poisoning their system for years. The affair exposed Carrie's true priorities in the most brutal way possible. She didn't want partnership or stability or mutual respect. She wanted the high that came from temporarily winning Big's attention, even if it meant destroying everything good in her life to get it. She was chasing the rush of intermittent reinforcement, the psychological equivalent of a gambling addiction. The unpredictable nature of Big's affection created the same neurochemical response as pulling a slot machine lever. The uncertainty made the occasional payoff feel more intense and valuable than consistent love ever could. Carrie's entire life became organized around this toxic dynamic in ways that should have terrified anyone who cared about her. She spent money she didn't have on clothes and lifestyle choices designed to impress Big and keep up with his wealthy social circle. She made career decisions based on his approval and validation rather than her own professional goals and interests. She sabotaged friendships when they conflicted with her Big obsession, becoming defensive and hostile whenever anyone questioned their relationship or pointed out the obvious red flags. She literally restructured her entire existence around the crumbs of attention from a man who saw her as an option, not a priority, as entertainment rather than a life partner. Her friends enabled this destruction instead of staging the intervention she desperately needed. They watched her spiral for years, breaking her own heart over and over again, sacrificing her financial security and emotional well-being, and they called it romance instead of recognizing it as self-destructive behavior that required professional help. Miranda occasionally voiced concerns, but ultimately, everyone treated Carrie's Big addiction like it was destiny instead of pathology. They participated in the fantasy that this was just how complicated love worked instead of calling it what it was, a trauma response that was destroying their friend's life. The financial cost alone should have been a massive wake-up call. Carrie nearly lost her apartment because she'd spent everything trying to maintain the lifestyle she thought would keep Big interested. She had $40,000 worth of shoes but no savings, no retirement fund, no financial security whatsoever. She had to borrow money from Charlotte to avoid eviction, literally asking her friends to subsidize her addiction to a man who wouldn't even call her his girlfriend. That's not love, that's self-destruction with a designer bag. That's someone so desperate for validation that they're willing to sacrifice their basic security and stability for the chance to impress someone who's already proven he doesn't value them. Real love doesn't require you to lose yourself, your friends, your financial security, or your peace of mind. Real love doesn't involve decades of uncertainty, emotional starvation, and constantly walking on eggshells. Real love doesn't make you feel crazy, desperate, or constantly on edge, wondering if this will be the day he finally decides you're not worth his time. If you want to see what healthy love actually looks like in SATC, look at Charlotte and Harry's relationship. Two people who supported each other's growth, communicated openly about their needs and boundaries, and built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Or look at Miranda and Steve's relationship, which wasn't always perfect but involved two people who consistently showed up for each other and worked through problems together instead of creating them. Carrie's relationship with Big was trauma bonding disguised as grand romance, and the disguise was so convincing that millions of viewers bought into it completely. Trauma bonding occurs when someone develops an intense psychological connection to an abusive or manipulative person through cycles of abuse and reward, tension and relief, rejection and love bombing. The intermittent reinforcement creates a powerful psychological addiction that feels more intense than healthy love because it's actually a stress response. Your nervous system gets addicted to the cycle of fear and relief, creating neurochemical patterns that feel like passion but are actually your body's attempt to cope with chronic psychological trauma. The passion Carrie felt wasn't romantic connection, it was cortisol and adrenaline flooding her system every time Big's behavior triggered her abandonment fears. The intensity wasn't deep emotional intimacy, it was anxiety and hypervigilance, her nervous system constantly scanning for signs that he was about to leave her again. The longing wasn't love, it was the desperate need to resolve an unresolvable psychological wound, to finally get the validation and security that her childhood abandonment issues convinced her she needed to survive. What makes this even more disturbing is the cultural impact Sex and the City had on an entire generation's understanding of love and relationships. The show convinced millions of women that constantly breaking up and making up was just part of being in love, that emotional unavailability was mysterious and romantic, that you should fight for someone who doesn't fight for you. SATC normalized toxic relationship dynamics and sold them as aspirational, teaching viewers that love should be difficult, confusing, and painful, that if a relationship was easy and stable, it probably wasn't passionate enough, that uncertainty equals excitement, that drama equals depth, that suffering for someone proves the intensity of your feelings. Millions of viewers went out looking for their own Mr. Big, not realizing they were searching for someone to traumatize them in designer suits. They learned to mistake anxiety for chemistry, inconsistency for mystery, and emotional unavailability for a challenge worth pursuing. Even Sarah Jessica Parker herself has now acknowledged how problematic their relationship was, admitting in recent interviews that the dynamic between Carrie and Big was far from the healthy romance they portrayed it as. She's expressed regret about the message the show sent about love and relationships, recognizing that what they presented as romantic was actually deeply dysfunctional. But the damage was already done. An entire generation learned that love should hurt, that uncertainty equals passion, that you should chase people who run from you and be suspicious of people who actually want to be with you. Gen Z viewers watching the show now are rightfully horrified by what millennials found romantic. They're calling out Carrie's behavior for what it was: selfish, destructive, and deeply unhealthy. They recognize Big as a manipulative narcissist instead of a romantic hero, and they see through the designer clothes and expensive restaurants to the psychological abuse underneath. They're asking the questions that should have been asked 20 years ago. Why did we root for a woman to end up with someone who consistently treated her poorly? Why did we find it romantic when she sacrificed everything for someone who wouldn't sacrifice anything for her? Why did we celebrate a relationship that made one person constantly question their worth and value? The most uncomfortable truth about Carrie and Big isn't just about their relationship, it's about why we rooted for them in the first place. We wanted to believe that if Carrie could finally get Big to commit, it would prove that love conquers all, that persistence pays off, that damaged people can heal each other through the power of romantic devotion. But that's not what happened, even after they finally got married. Their relationship remained fundamentally dysfunctional throughout both movies. Big continued to make major decisions without consulting Carrie, like buying an enormous apartment without asking her opinion. Carrie continued to organize her entire life around his needs and moods, his schedule and preferences. They never addressed the fundamental power imbalance that defined their relationship from the beginning. They never dealt with the psychological wounds that brought them together in such a toxic way. They just got older and wealthier while maintaining the same destructive patterns that had defined their relationship for decades. Carrie's choice to be with Big wasn't about love, it was about self-worth, or rather her lack of it. She believed on a deep, unconscious level that she wasn't worthy of genuine love and partnership, so she settled for someone who would confirm her worst beliefs about herself. She chose someone who would recreate her childhood wounds instead of someone who might actually help her heal them. She picked familiar pain over unfamiliar peace, known suffering over unknown happiness, because at least with Big she knew what to expect. The chaos was predictable, the hurt was comfortable, the rejection felt like home. The real tragedy isn't that Carrie and Big had a complicated relationship that took years to figure out. The real tragedy is that millions of viewers watched a woman choose psychological trauma over emotional health and called it the greatest love story ever told. We celebrated dysfunction, romanticized abuse, and taught an entire generation that real love requires you to lose yourself completely. We need to stop romanticizing relationships that destroy people's sense of self-worth. We need to start recognizing the difference between love and addiction, between passion and pathology, between romantic chemistry and trauma bonding, between destiny and self-destruction. So ask yourself this in your own relationships: are you choosing love or are you choosing what feels familiar? Are you building something healthy with someone who values values and respects you, or are you feeding old wounds with someone who keeps them fresh and bleeding? Are you with someone who makes you feel more like yourself, or someone who makes you question everything about who you are? Because Carrie's story isn't a cautionary tale about complicated love that eventually works out. It's a warning about what happens when we mistake our trauma responses for romantic destiny, when we confuse our psychological wounds with our heart's desire, and when we choose the familiar pain of being unloved over the terrifying possibility of actually being valued by someone who sees us clearly and chooses us anyway.